Well, thanks very much, Kevin, for that introduction. Sarah, if you could move to that first slide. As Kevin said, I am the executive director of the Pennypack Ecological Restoration Trust, and many of you are very local to here. You know the trust extremely well, but we have an opportunity to talk to other folks who might not know our far corner of northeastern Montgomery County. But we are a land trust as well as a nature preserve. We own 725 acres of contiguous landscapes along the middle Pennypack, and we help our neighbors ease another 133 acres, also contiguous. And we manage our land specifically for habitat of other species. We also manage 11 miles of trail for this species to use, although we let other species use that too. And it was about, I should say, we are a private member supported land trust. We are not a county park. We are not a state park. We purchase land with money that you give us kindly every year through membership. And so we really strongly need your membership to make things run around here and for us to grow and for us to acquire new lands as they come on. I would love for the trust to hit 1,000 acres in the next 10 years. It was about a year ago that my wife said, "Have you heard about No Mow May?" And I said, "No, I haven't." But as she explained it to me, there's a really cute little phrase that was essentially encouraging landowners, both small and large, to think about mowing a little bit less. We'll talk about exactly who owns No Mow May and what that means and where that comes from. But rather than simply kind of look on the social media blurb about No Mow May and then forward it on to whoever will listen to us in social media, we decided that we would trial versions of alternative mowing regimes all around the Pennypack Trust, all around that 725 acres that we own. So today we're giving you our own version of what it means to mow less and what are the pros and cons of that. And you know what worked for us and what didn't work for us. And because this story goes on and really has quite a bit of strategic and logistic implications, we've divided this into at least 2 sessions. So our next session will be on March 9th, where we will talk about more of the tactics of what kind of equipment you need, when to use it, when you should consider mowing and when you should not consider mowing if you're going to change your mowing schedule, and also remind you of the ecological principles involved there. And our third lecture will not be a Zoom lecture, but will be a tour of the various sites that we're trialing. So you can see in action what's going on and what's flourishing and what's not flourishing there. I presume we're going to give that tour sometime in May or June. I don't think we've scheduled that yet. And most importantly, this presentation and these trials would not be possible without Sarah Pelleccia. Sarah Pelleccia came to us through our internship program. She started just about a year ago today, actually, and she came pre-packaged with a master's in entomology from the University of Kentucky. She, like me, has an undergraduate degree in environmental studies, environmental science at Drexel. I come from the University of Buffalo. And Sarah's keen interest in entomology and its various impacts throughout the trust was definitely of interest to us, because as you guys know, and as you will be certainly reminded throughout this presentation, getting energy to flow from sun to soil to water to plants to bugs and then on to other animals is really the essence of ecology and how we foster those connections. So Sarah, thanks so much for your work here, and thank you for leading us through tonight.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction. So I prompted you guys with this question. I didn't ask it out loud, but just to get you guys thinking, what do you use your lawn for? There's so many things that we can be using it for. It can be a place of recreation where we toss the ball back and forth between our kids. It can be an aesthetic area where we have gardens flourishing, flowers blooming, or a place for our animals to play around in, whether it's dogs or horses or whatever you have. Or it can be a place where you barbecue or have picnics. So all of these things are really great. And we definitely want to keep using our lawn for those things that are really important to us, especially culturally. So whatever you're using your lawn for, that's so great. And we want you to keep that up. But there are some other things we want you to consider. So the coverage of turf in the US covers about 40 million acres of land. And that's more than 3 times any irrigated crop in the US. And turf by itself does not have much ecological value. It's not really a diverse place where plants can grow. It doesn't support much habitat for bugs or mammals or birds. And so you're limited to the species that are really accustomed to that disturbance of you trampling over it and cutting it. So yeah, and like even our area right here, you can see in that red circle just how densely green that is, that turf area. And this is a place right around the corner from PERT. And that aerial view of the lawn just takes up so much space. So this is a huge area that we could do so much with. And that's what we want you to start thinking about. So we wanted to get into, why do we love lawns? And this is what I want Chris to give a little history about.
So as a landscape architect, we generally look at landscapes from a cultural perspective first. And the history of lawn as primarily a European landscape that's been imported to North America. Really, I know that lawns exist elsewhere, but from our perspective, really lawns are a European contrivance. They were highly functional, as you can see here, for centuries, going back to the Middle Ages and probably before that. There were animals grazing in your front yard. And certainly in the European context, those animals were eating grasses, either warm season or cool season grasses. You will be educated as to what the differences are between those, but they're essential forage for the animals that we use for raising sheep, for raising cattle, for horses, etc. And it was also part of, and we'll skip to the next slide, as the kind of medieval tradition of having lawns, which were keenly associated with fiefdoms, evolved. It evolved into really a place setting for architecture and a place setting for leisure. So here's a good example of what you see in the foreground would be French parterres, a tightly mown lawn, so that you can have a good view of your estate, of your house. And also those views are extremely important. Having long views across your landscape is a part of safety and the perception of safety. On the next slide, here's a great example of those medieval traditions. This is Windsor Castle in England. And while Windsor Castle is not exactly medieval, this really highlights its roots, where the wealthy folks, the folks really in charge of the domain, are up on the high ground, and the village and all of the agricultural production are responsible for making lawn and managing pasture. It's also part of an arrival sequence. It's part of suggesting and making people know as they enter your property or enter your fiefdom exactly who's in charge. Again, that long sight line has a psychological underpinning to it. And in the final example here, there's a real functional aspect to lawn that we should not forgo. Lawn is prevalent in huge civic monumentality, both in Europe and the United States and many other places, because you can assemble a lot of people on it. And if you manage that lawn and its soils and its nutrients properly, you can trample it over and over and over again and then mow it and it comes back. So it's a really functional plant selection for a civic environment. It's not without its merits, I'll say. Finally, and this is very near and dear to my heart, Lawn is part of the pastoral aesthetic, which comes from European landscape architects and park designers of the Enlightenment and of the 19th century. And that's where Frederick Law Olmsted gets his roots. And we know that Olmsted is the progenitor of landscape architecture in the United States. And he worked prolifically up and down the East Coast, all the way out to San Francisco in a variety of ways. But this is the park aesthetic that many of us have grown up with. And again, it's safety, durability. It's also about legibility and ease of maintenance. So we have a lot of deep roots. I guess that's kind of a pun because grass has generally shallow roots, but we have a lot of cultural deep roots with this kind of texture. Sarah? Oh,
Yeah,
sorry,
yeah,
this one more. We really enthusiastically brought this back with us, or brought this to the New World with us. There was no revolution about lawn when we split off from the colonies, and we spend tremendous amounts of money and time managing that aesthetic.
Yeah, and just as you said, that cultural thing, it's a very important part of our culture, maintaining these lawns and making them look nice and crisp. And a lot goes into maintaining those lawns. You got to put a bunch of seed down. Lawns today were not possible in the way that we know them before we had all of these inventions, this ability to figure out what seed mix really works in our areas. In Europe, the moderate climate there and the heavy rains that they would get worked really well for having lawns that would grow nice and easy. But here where we get really cold winters, really hot summers, the grass here had a little bit more trouble establishing. So they had to come up with these diverse seed mixes. And so between having all of the seed that you put in and then putting pesticides and herbicides down to keep away the unwanted plants and diseases, as well as adding a bunch of fertilizer in. So because there's not a large variety of plants using all the different types of nutrients in different quantities, there's a need for fertilizers in order to replenish those nutrients. And then with that, we're mowing it, of course, to keep it nice and even and low to the ground. And this would have been so labor intensive before the invention of the lawnmower, needing scythes, and that took a lot of training and precision to be able to do. And now with lawnmowers, even the lower class were able to keep these nice, crisp, lower lawns. And because they're being cut, you need a lot of water. A lot of water is being lost through those wounds that are created from each blade that is cut. And so with the invention of the rubber hose, that made it possible to add more water to your lawn. And so a lot of maintenance goes into keeping these really nice lawns that became such a civic duty for us and a staple of American culture. And so what is a lawn? There's a lot that goes into them. There are cool and warm season grasses. So warm season grasses tend to peak in those warmer seasons. That's when they start to seed and flower. It includes things like blue stems and Indian grass, as well as Bermuda grass. And then there are cool season grasses. And these do better in the cool seasons in the spring and in the fall. It includes things like fescues, bluegrasses, and poa species. And they vary throughout the season. So here's a wonderful example over at our orchard near Raythorn Farm. In that orchard side on the right, there are the cool season grasses. And so this is in early July. I know those cool season grasses have already put their seed out and they've done their job. Whereas on the left, those warm season grasses are just now starting to reach their peak and are nice and green and vibrant. And so it's really important to have that combination of cool and warm season grasses in your garden. And that's what they put in those seed mixes, is that combination. So if you can imagine, if you only had one or the other, there'd be times of the year where your lawn is brown. And so what is in turf? It's a variety of things. It's not just one type of grass. It's this variety. And it's not just grasses that you want in your lawn. You want forbs, flowers such as clover, which has that important job of fixing nitrogen. And there's that difference in your lawn of the sunlight that's hitting it, the water availability. And so some of those grasses are going to do better in certain areas than others. And so what happens if you start to let it grow? So first, those grasses, they're just going to become a grassland. They're going to grow tall. But if you continue to let it go unmown, as the years go by, trees and shrubs and other woody vegetation are going to start springing up as succession starts taking place. And so what mowing does is it creates this disturbance. So on the one hand, it cuts back on those vines and woody stems. But on the other hand, it also restarts and inhibits natural processes. Flower buds have to start regrowing, and insect habitat and forage is degraded. Whatever started feeding in there is going to have to start over. And by cutting that grass, as we mentioned earlier, it makes the grass lose water faster. So here is an example of porcelain berry starting to creep into the grasses that we have here.
Sarah, if I could interject for a
Yes,
second.
yeah.
Exactly on that slide. So I think a lot of folks have this misconception that if you let your lawn grow tall, that you will let flowers come up. And in this part of the world, that is southeastern Pennsylvania and many other parts of northeastern United States, you tend to get woody species that come up into that lawn. While you'll certainly have some flowers, it's not going to turn itself from a grassland into a flower meadow and then into a scrubland. It's going to quickly move into scrubland with woody vegetation. And that porcelain berry that you see there is going to get woody fast. And it's also going to interweave itself at lawn height, which is going to further reduce grasses and favor conditions towards those early woody species.
Yeah, so a lot would go into it if you wanted to have it a flowering meadow. You can't just sit back and let it be. And so when grasses are cut back, they may or may not have that wherewithal to set out another set of flowers. So they might put that energy into more clonal reproduction and send out these rhizomes and have these patches of grass coming up that way. It can also instead throw out their flowers and seeds at a lower height and reproduce that way. So when they're routinely cut back at a low height, you can sometimes get the flowers and seeds springing up at a lower height. And so this brings us into our No Mow May experimenting.
Yeah, those of you who are, I guess, accustomed to managing turf, particularly athletic turf, you know the difference between how Kentucky bluegrass versus fescues will repair themselves from divots or from heavy recreational use. And some really prefer clonal reproduction and will self-heal those divots rather than the need to just throw down more seed, which is often the case with Kentucky bluegrass, for instance. And getting back to that dwarfing, it's really an interesting adaptation that many grasses have, in that when they are cut back because they've been eaten by an animal or they've been hit by a mower blade, some of them know enough or are hit at the right time, I should say, to think, okay, I have the resources in my root system that I can try and flower again and try sexual reproduction one more time. And that kind of dwarfism is something that we can play to our advantage as we think about alternative mowing cycles here in our part of the world. So we don't lose sexual reproduction just by mowing it once or twice. These grasses have the ability to adapt. So getting back to the essence of No Mow May, very clever title, super catchy. And you can see here it's formatted for your phone, so this message can get across really quickly. On the next slide, we see that this is actually a very recent phenomenon, began in the United Kingdom just a few years ago and adopted in Wisconsin in 2020. And it's not uncommon when you see promotion for No Mow May to show exactly this kind of background, right? Look at all those flowers, and you have so much color, and some of it's, and you also have a big height diversity. And then there's this very comely mow strip right through the middle that kind of gives sense and sensibility to it all. And quite frankly, that's not what happens when you stop mowing. That's what happens when you plant the right flower seed mix interwoven into your turf grasses, or if you simply start from scratch and you use a mix of wildflowers as well as grasses in your mix. But this is not something that's going to happen on your yard anytime soon if you don't add those specialty mixes. However, I'll say that the message of No Mow May that really grabbed onto us is that whether you're dealing with grasses or flowers or both, there is definitely ecological value to those grasses growing with less disturbance in their life because there's insects at various life stages that are using them. So Sarah is about to walk through all of those steps that show the various, all of that transition between plant material to insect matter and the various ways insects interact with them. That's really the punchline of No Mow May for us.
Yeah, exactly. So as I had pointed out before, how vast that turf area takes up within the areas that we live. And so we would love to provide ecological benefits and value in addition to that practical and aesthetic benefits that we get from lawn. Bugs occupy all different kinds of niches or parts within the plant, from the flowers to the stems, to the leaves, and to the roots. Occupying the space of the flowers tends to be the pollinators. So by letting lawns grow, it allows for those flowers to bloom and pollinators to forage, and lots of things pollinate. We're so familiar with the bees and butterflies that do that pollination, but there's also different kinds of flies, such as hoverflies. There are moths as well, beetles, true bugs, and even birds and bats will also do some pollination. And so this would benefit not just the bees and butterflies, but a wide diversity of organisms. And the bee population ebbs and flows with that availability of pollen and nectar. And there's that a really big importance in having a variety of flowers, depending on flower shape, size, color, height, odor, and the species. Some insects can only pollinate certain flowers. And likewise, some flowers can only be pollinated by certain insects or birds. Occupying that space of the vegetation and feeding on that would be herbivores. So you can have caterpillars, plant hoppers, leaf hoppers, crickets, katydids, grasshoppers, aphids, leaf beetles, all types of things. And they convert that plant biomass into their own biomass and use the nutrients in a new pattern within their bodies. Some chew on the leaves, others suck the juices out of the leaves and stems, others mine through those layers within a leaf, and some bore through the stems and like inside of the stem. Some are specialists and some are generalists. Specialists have very specific host plants that they need to feed on, whereas generalists can feed on a wide diversity of plants. So the specialist species will only be present if that particular species or group of species is there, whereas the generalist will probably be there regardless of whatever plants you have.
I want to interject one thing right there. When it comes to herbivory, a lot of folks really freak out when they see bugs eating their plants, whether it's their tomato plants or whether it's just seeing bugs, punch holes into leaves. A lot of folks really freak out about that because it's destroying the aesthetic, or there's somebody else that's demonstrating control over that plant and over that landscape. When in fact, those insects are becoming juicy morsels themselves to other animals and driving the food chain, again, from plant matter to insect matter, they're essentially transforming plant matter into protein that is going to be used by others. And Sarah's got a lot of examples of that. But the instinct of a lot of folks these days is to go get a pesticide. And essentially what they're doing is they're cutting the ladder of the food chain at its bottom level, or at one of its lower levels, I should say. And that's really something that it's a behavior, quite frankly, that needs to stop. And by reducing the amount of mowing, we allow those relationships to flourish just a little bit longer. So you're buying time for those systems for that energy to work itself through the chains.
Yeah, that is really good to point out because I love bugs so much. So I'm like, why would you want to kill them? But yeah, I forget that other people don't have that same love for them. But there are predators that will feed on those other bugs. Of course, mantids are such a familiar one that I think most people tend to like mantids, and yeah, so they can be found utilizing the vegetation as hunting grounds and as habitat with which to rest in and to reproduce in as well. And they rely on the presence of those herbivores in order to feed themselves and or their young. This European hornet I got to see swoop down and snatch this grasshopper up, which was quite an exciting thing to see. But what that one was going to do is going to bring it home to its nest so that its babies can then feed on it. And I got to see so many grasshoppers hopping through this field here. So there was an abundance of food for it to be able to feed its babies. Yeah, so there's a diversity of predators as well. It's not just wasps and mantids. There's this ambush bug, which will just sit and wait for something to come up and not notice that it's there and then snatch it. Of course, there are spiders, and there's a robber fly here on the bottom, which is actually eating a mosquito, which is my favorite part of this picture. I think we can all appreciate when mosquitoes are eaten. And then doing another really, really important role down often in that bottom layer, either through the leaf litter on the bottom or in the soil itself, but also sometimes on the leaves are the scavengers and decomposers, the things that are breaking down that dead material, which we of course don't want just sitting around. So they get to convert that material back into something really useful for the plants to use again. There's ants, carrion beetles, dung beetles, and this fly that was eating, I think was possibly a dead caterpillar on a leaf, but it also could have been bird poop. I'm not sure. But it's doing that really important job so that plants are then able to reuse that material. And it's also really important that we have the structural space for reproduction for the insects. All of the guilds that we just went through use this habitat to reproduce in some way. Some, such as the monarch egg pictured here, need very specific plants, such as the milkweed, while others, such as the mantis egg laid here, are looking for something with that structural support to lay their eggs on. So here it's got its egg laid on some piece of grass. I've seen them laid on twigs and trees and all kinds of structures. So they're not too picky about what species it is, but they want that nice rigid structure. And this process of them going from egg through their immature stages to adult can sometimes take days or weeks or months, or sometimes even years.
And when we mow, I'm sorry to interrupt you one more time there, Sarah, but when we mow or we weed whack or we bring out the brush hog, we are essentially taking away those opportunities for those insects to emerge in their larval stages in the following spring. This is the strategy in which insects can avoid the hazard of winter and freezing temperatures, is by going into this kind of by going into this life phase and avoiding that. When we digest those things prematurely, we set those populations back, and that has a ripple effect throughout the ecosystem.
Yeah, thanks. And these common plants that you find in your lawn, these switchgrasses, crabgrass, Kentucky bluegrass, orchard grass, all these things are so common on our lawns, but they can be used for butterfly host plants. So if you were to just let them grow a little bit longer, it goes from that ecological value of being very little to something that can really be a habitat and a chance for reproduction to happen. So all of this could be of so much value if you just let it grow a little bit more. And so a lot of people ask me what they can plant in order to see more butterflies in their yards. And while flowers are important and definitely will attract them, they're nothing without their host plants, which are vital for the caterpillar's development. So grasses are important host plants specifically for skippers and a lot of grass moth species, but there's a variety of other host plants such as milkweed that are not even within that grass group. So by allowing it to grow, adding in a variety of different plants, it provides more habitat and foraging for all these species. And caterpillars are really important for birds. Many birds are, the caterpillars are a staple of their diet, particularly for their young. So the caterpillars eat the plants and the birds eat the caterpillars. As you can see, the bluebird here is feeding on a couple of caterpillars that it's going to take home to its little chicks in its nest. Chickadees need 6,000 caterpillars just to feed one clutch of babies. That is a massive amount of caterpillars. And how wonderful would it be if we could help them out by providing that space for those caterpillars to grow and feed on?
I'll add one more thing to that, which is a lot of folks don't realize that, you can feed both of those birds, but in particular chickadees, you can feed them seed this time of year and they're perfectly happy. But their kids simply don't grow without the protein of insect biomass. You cannot raise baby chickadees and many, many other songbirds without insect protein. And that's one of the reasons why we see a collapse of songbird populations throughout North America, is because nobody really wants to talk about the collapse of the insect guilds underneath them that are responsible for that. So this is not a trivial matter, and we're seeing the impacts of decades and decades of reducing insect habitat starting to cascade.
Yeah, and so now I want to transition into what we did here at PERT and how we grew our lawns tall. So we interrupted our usual mowing schedule last year at several different locations around the trust. And these were areas that would be mowed throughout the spring through fall every year, every couple of weeks, just like any of you would mow your lawn. So the first one I'll show you is here at our paddocks. It's just off of Paper Mill Road. And after 1 month of letting it grow, this is what it looked like. And there are seed heads that are present here, and that they help show that variety throughout the through those different textures and colors that we have going on in this picture. And letting it grow another month, we expanded that strip around the trees, but other than that, we just continued to let it grow. And there is another area right next door to that where we also let it grow. So we kept some areas short for places that we needed to walk so that there's still accessibility. And this picture is taken in the middle of May, and that was only a couple of weeks without it being mown. And again in July, you can see that the grass seed has set seed by this point, and it's done its job for the season. And I had gone through in July and cut some of the seed heads off just to see the variety that we had growing throughout it. And so this was 14 different kinds of grasses that I found within that small area of the paddocks. And that's not including any of the flowers that I found within it as well. So we tend to think of our lawns as just being so uniform, when really there's this whole community of grasses within it. And so it could be really interesting to see what pops up in your yard if you let it grow for a couple months or just a month. This is another area where we let the grass grow just behind our office, which you can see in the background of this picture. And the texture of this field is completely different. Much of what came up in May was Creeping Charlie, but there was also some grasses poking through. And by September, it was mostly just a blanket of Japanese stilt grass, which looks really pretty. I really do like how this looks, but it's not really an ideal species we would want to have. But if we wanted to increase the diversity of species and incorporate other plants that we like, we could sprinkle some seed, as we mentioned before, throughout here in hopes that in the following year, it'll spring up. We also did this by our orchard off of Raythorn Farm. And this was my favorite place that it grew. I just thought it looked so stunning, that combination of the trees and the grasses. And not only did I like it, but the blackbirds, the red-winged blackbirds seemed to love it. They spent a lot of time in there, even found some nests in the grass. And so we let this grow for a couple months, and then we cut the grass back by the time that we needed to start harvesting the ripe fruit, so that it was still serving that function of being able to get to the trees and collect the fruit. But we let it grow for a good while and do its job and let those red-winged blackbirds fly off out of their nest. And so I also took a sample of grasses from here, and I noticed that there was less diversity than I found in the paddocks. But I also found different flowers as well, but I didn't take samples of those.
I'll interject here about that particular landscape, in that I wanted to have that mown much earlier than July, but those folks who were out there analyzing who was living in there and the relationships that we're building were screaming bloody murder, saying, no, there's a lot of complexity happening here. And by, I think it was mid-June, the red-winged blackbirds had started building nests out of that grass material, and eggs were in those nests. And so this is kind of part of the strategic and logistic issues that we'll talk about in March. You know, if you let this go too long, you are really going to get obligated to some real biomass and real relationships that you might not be expecting, to say nothing about code and neighborly issues and things of that nature. Just if you care about the environment that you're fostering, you find yourself on both edges of the sword.
Right. I wanted to say something else there, but now I forgot it, so I'll move on. So we saw a variety of flowers pop up. As I mentioned before, there was creeping Charlie. We had some fleabane, white clover, which the bumblebees just love, buttercup, Dame's rocket, and of course, dandelion. Everyone gets some dandelion and clover. So none of these are particularly spectacular, but they're still providing nectar and pollen for the bees, butterflies, flies, beetles, etc. And the clovers and like legumes, they do an important job in nitrogen fixing and providing that different set of nutrients for the grass to then be able to feed off of. And so we want to give you some tips on how to grow it tall. I'll touch on some things here, but we'll also get a little more in depth during our March 9th presentation. So remember what you're using your lawn for and what you want it to be. You can keep mowing the areas that you're constantly walking through. So you can mow pathways wherever you need to walk through. If you need to walk to your garage, the street, wherever it is, your shed, you can have those pathways so that you're still walking through that short grass and you don't have to worry about that tall grass. You can also mow these nice crisp edges that keeps it looking intentional and not like you've forgotten about it and you're just being lazy. We also recommend that you clear the previous year's leaf litter, preferably in the fall, just to prevent patchiness. Push it somewhere else so that those leaves are still really great to leave around, particularly for moths that overwinter in the shelter of that leaf litter. But if you leave it there, you'll see those patches where the sun was blocked by the leaves. So if you want to keep it looking nice, it's just a recommendation we have. So mow the areas that you need to and let the rest grow. That is our recommendation. And have fun with it. This was an example from Meg Patricia, where in her backyard, she decided to leave these patches where she saw all these clovers popping up and just mow around those areas. So she's got these areas where it's growing tall so that those flowers can be blooming, and areas where she kept it short. And the bees greatly enjoyed it. And there's also ways you can make it engaging. The UK did this fun little thing where they called it Every Flower Counts. And so they told people that they can count all the flowers within a 1 meter by 1 meter plot and note how many different flowers there are. And they were even able to put it into this website where they noted it all, and it told them how many honeybees that could support based on the nectar that they studied that each of these flowers could hold. And you can compare it over the years. Maybe as the years go on, you end up having more flowers and you can see how it's working out. And while you're doing that, I suggest looking for evidence of insect use. Are there things pollinating them? Are there things chewing on the leaves? Do you see ants crawling around? Any carrion beetles crawling through the ground? So just have fun with it. See what ecological value it's having. And you might be wondering, will it bounce back? If I let this grow for a month or two, or even the whole season, what's it gonna look like once I mow it? So within a month of us mowing it, we decided to mow it in August by the time we mowed the paddocks. And within a month, it's back to that luscious, beautiful green that we all know and love. You can see that little transition here as it goes on. And you wouldn't even know that we experimented with it by the end of this year. And so we recommend that you come back March 9th to hear more about it. We're going to talk about how to keep things within ordinance guidelines, how and when to mow, tools that you'd need. And in the meantime, don't mow in March, and we'll tell you what we recommend for doing next. We'll probably talk about much more too. So Chris, if there's anything else you want to add, I just have a thank you for your attention, and we can move into questions.
Yeah, I'll just say that I don't mean to oversell you guys on what you just saw there. The Pennypack Trust has a lot of heavy machinery that can accomplish that kind of mowing in the middle of the summer, and also machinery for digesting the grasses once you cut it. And there's just so many considerations in terms of what you can and cannot do on your property. But there's a lot of room for experimentation. And I really want to underscore what Sarah said, which is at the very least, just start thinking about the areas that you know you do not need to use. I think that's a really good beginning point. Where are the areas that you think can become something else and that you can experiment with? Or where are the areas that you know that you will have conflict with your neighbors over in the next few months if you don't do something about it? So lots to chew on between now and March, and I'm sure we're all going to be sharpening our mower blades and changing spark plug wires and other things as we do get ready for the growing season. You will need to do all that stuff. It really helps with fuel efficiency, by the way. So yeah, I don't mean to steal Sarah's thunder here at all. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for all of your help.
Well, thank you, Chris. It was awesome to see this finally put together. I heard you guys having meetings, countless meetings about this, and our staff, and it's just been a fun year of experimenting with this. And well, I think you guys came up with an honest, good presentation. Hopefully no one leaves with their hopes too high, because this does take work, as you guys said, and maintenance. So thank you for this honest presentation. I'll go through the questions. If anyone has questions, please put them in the chat now. So far, it's mostly been just comments. So I'll start reading through some of the comments here. Tracy Brown says she uses her lawn to grow weeds. Paul Rissette, commenting on one of your comments about neighbors and things like that, Chris, he says, pressure to keep up with what your neighbors are doing, weed-free lawns. Yeah, that's a big component of all of this, is your neighbors and code, which we'll get into in March, I believe.
Yeah, I just
having signs and stuff really helps, I think, too. Being like, we're not being lazy. There's something going on here.
Yeah, signage is absolutely important. And we can't forget that lawn is a cultural thing. And we're trying to transform a cultural thing into something that's a little bit more ecologically friendly. And just in saying that, you know, you're rubbing against the grain in a lot of domains. So we should all be cognizant of the fact that very few other people have ever even thought about lawn being different.
Yeah, it's
Exactly.
such a normal thing in our culture that you think it's always been that way, and that's what it's supposed to be. Yeah.
I'll just repeat what I say to my stream keepers all the time, is leave the pitchforks at home. If you really want to go change your neighbor's mind, going and starting an argument is not going to work. So leave the pitchforks at home and go have a conversation, bring this webinar with them, have a chat with them. That's the best way to go into that, which leads into the next comment, which is Suzanne Frank saying, bugs in my garden and lawn, I consider a victory. It's the whole point. If only I could convince all of my neighbors with their mosquito shield signs. So like I just said, leave the pitchforks at home and have a conversation with them. You'll get a lot further than starting any kind of arguments or anything like that.
Yeah, that's how I see it too. My mom has a garden outside of her place, and I'm always looking to see what bugs they're using it and how successful it is in terms of the bug population.
Exactly. Just showing people and sharing what you have is the best way. And then T4, someone didn't put their name, but says, so great to see appreciation and understanding for insects and their role within the food chain. This is so important. Good comment. And then Deborah, which gets to the heart of the code situation a lot of people run into. She says, unfortunately, in the city of Philadelphia, there is an ordinance regarding grass height, and there's a program called CLIP that will cut a lawn that has reached over 8 inches and then send you a bill. I try to mow once a month and mow only to 2.5 to 3 inch height to retain water and insects. Deborah, that's perfect. I believe, not to step on Sarah and Chris, but that's exactly what we want you guys to do, is go to what you're comfortable with, what your mower is comfortable with, what your code's comfortable with, you know, whatever you're comfortable with and what you can handle. Sarah and Chris are nodding.
My 18 by 18, what used to be lawn in front of my house in Northwest Philadelphia, I converted to native plants, mostly forbs, very little grass at all. And I thought I was being very thoughtful in what was the sequence of that flowering, what was the height, so that people could see that it was under control. And I got a fine. I was fined by the code folks, and I had to go defend myself and my idea. But that landscape did grow. That same landscape that I grew now 15 years ago is still chugging along, and it's completely lawn free.
Happy story for the most part.
Yeah, it is an up and down process.
I mean, I think most people on this call agree you shouldn't have had that battle to begin with, but that's where we're at. And well, everyone that joined tonight, the 62 folks that are here, it's our job to keep moving it forward. So the next couple of comments were just very informative. Thank you, engaging, looking forward to March 9th. Then the next question comes from G Win, says, great presentation. Is there any concern for an increase in lanternflies by not mowing?
So lanternflies would be going after like porcelain berries. So if you're worried about porcelain berry creeping in, if there's like any bordering your land, then possibly, because they would enjoy that stuff. But they're not interested in the grasses or the flowers. They want those woody stems, the cherry trees, the porcelain berry, the grapevines, all those kinds of things. A lot of woody species.
And a lot of the species that I think come from their original region.
Yeah, there's like, tree of heaven, and yeah, walnut trees they love, tulip poplars, all kinds of things, but not the grasses.
Next question is, I saw many native plants from your plant sale in the fall. Do you have another one scheduled? Oh, great question. Yes, we do. That is on May 7th. That'll be coming out in our next coming events calendar that all members receive for free in the mail. So if you're not a member, definitely consider joining for at least $35 a year, and we'll be sending you the coming events for the next year. So that's one perk of becoming a member. And most of those programs are discounted or free for members. So great question. And we'll see you at the plant sale, May 7th. Some more good comments here. Fantastic presentation. A question for Tom says, most recommendations for maintaining meadows say an annual mowing is necessary and that March is the best time for that. Why are you saying not to mow in March?
That advice is exactly spot on. And our 110 acres of warm season grasses here at the Trust ideally should be mown in late February and early March, so that we are leaving that structure up that contains insect eggs, that contains seed heads for birds to feed on, the overwintering birds. And yeah, you should only mow once when you have an established meadow. But we're saying right now for you lawn owners that you should not immediately disturb a landscape that we want you to observe in the spring, right? So you don't have, we're not assuming that you already have a meadow. We're assuming that you want something different and that you need to understand what's going to come up. You saw some absolutely horrible pictures of landscapes in front of my house and near the office here, or at least they're horrible to me. But we needed to let that go to see what it would yield in order for us to figure out how to steer that in the future. So again, those of you who are experienced in meadows, I don't want to dissuade you from doing what you're doing. That's great. But for those of you who are interested in seeing actually what kind of lies underneath a lawn that you've been managing as such for a long time, it's time to let that relax and see if you're going to get a massive crop of dandelions that you like, or a massive crop of dandelions that you don't like, or lots of creeping Charlie, and other things. And so this is about you understanding what's there and how you like it.
Thank you. Next question comes from Jean Quinn. Will you cover how to inform neighbors of the project? Use a sign for people walking by, question mark?
Yeah, we'll be, so that No Mow May poster kind of thing that Chris said, you know, looks so nice for your phone. That is a sign that is recommended that you could use to print out and put in your yard. So that's one example. I think there were other ones that I found online too, of signs that you could use to show your neighbors, like, this is what we're doing here. This is the reason why. So yeah, we'll include that in the next presentation.
Question, Jean. Thank you. It's great to inform your neighbors of what you're doing. Even before you put the sign up, go have a conversation with them and just let them know what you're doing and why. Good
Maybe
question.
they'll want to do it too.
Ideally, right? Ideally. All right, next question. This is a good one from Maureen Mirabella. She says, first off, this is fantastic and thank you so much. I'm wondering how you deal with local ordinances that limit grass heights. I'm seeing some townships changing them to allow for more rewinding. What are your thoughts?
I know you can definitely like reach out to the people that make these ordinances and like be like, hey, can we change them? Is it okay if we do these kinds of things? So I recommend doing that type of thing as well. But if you are still limited by those ordinances, yes, setting your lawnmower at a taller height and just keeping it just within those ordinances is an option. Chris, did you have other thoughts?
Well, we're going to get into that strategies for just reducing disturbance while still having a lawn. There's advantages to just mowing less frequently so that you can stay within your code. I like what Sarah's saying there. Certainly in Upper Moreland Township, everybody I deal with there is extremely friendly and open for a conversation. Doesn't mean they're going to change the ordinance overnight, but you can start a great conversation. And Lynette Saunders and the EAC are also really good sources for information, as well as guidance on who you should talk to make a sea change happen. Again, all of that in March.
And if you do make your way to a local township meeting, the same rule applies. Leave the pitchforks at home. Casual, good conversations, friendly, bringing up facts. That's the way to get the point across to them as well. Next question. Thank you for that question, Maureen. That was great. Trish asks, our local parks meadow is mown in March. That way the high grass is still there over winter as cover for birds and insects. Oh, not a question, just a comment. Trish, I'd love to know where that park is. If you could throw that in the chat box, that's awesome. And then we have a question from Dave Kudish. Dave asks, I use a landscaper. Outside of outright asking them if they support a No Mow May, is there a way to get them on board with this concept? Very good question.
I really want to provide some guidance on this because actually it's the landscapers that can roll off the really heavy pieces of expensive equipment that are capable of dealing with higher grasses and landscapes that can grow in for a little bit longer. They're also very capable of making mow strips and finessing your landscape so that it has these areas that can grow in, but still look controlled. I think that we could probably win over many more folks if we had a network of landscapers that could get behind this aesthetic. So I think it's a really tantalizing idea to make this not just about landowner outreach, but also landscape maintenance firm outreach.
Good question, Dave. Thank you for that. Then we have a comment from Winifred Lutz. One thing that wasn't mentioned in terms of Pennypack's meadows is that large machine mowing kills animals like box turtles that live in them.
That's absolutely true. Our disturbances of the landscape have consequences. And ecologically speaking, there's death everywhere, quite frankly. There's a cycling of life everywhere. And it's inevitable. It can be unfortunate, but if we don't do that, then we lose some of the most precious early successional landscapes that bring those birds here. These are the choices that we make in our management plans.
Yeah, no management plan is going to be perfect and have zero consequences to it, unfortunately. So yeah, it is just kind of weighing out those pros and cons.
Very good question, Winifred. Thank you. Next question comes from our partner, Paul Reset from the Pennsylvania Environmental Council. He says, so you are starting with the let it grow approach to see what comes up, but you also emphasize that you will need to plant native species. So try to let it grow first and then plan on what to plant.
I mean, you could do that. That's kind of what we're doing. But I mean, feel free to throw in whatever you want anyway, instead of waiting to just see what pops up. Chris?
I think that poster that you showed from the UK, where folks are analyzing what flowers are coming up, and the slide that you showed that had non-native species like dandelions popping up. We're dealing with a non-native turf grass. And so if we're going to tolerate it for that much longer, we're also going to have to know that there's going to be non-native flowers as part of that. Myself as a beekeeper, I love the dandelions. That's a great nectar source, but the bees themselves are not native. So we're working on let's think about what we're trying to recover here. We're trying to recover ecological function from what is otherwise a total desert, a food desert, if you will, ecologically. And we can't have everything perfect straight away. But you do raise a good point. We can't be absolutist about native species in this realm.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Chris. We have a lot of comments here, so I'm trying to skip through to some of the questions. Thank you for your great comments, everybody. I'm not just ignoring you, just trying to get to the questions here. Next question is, this is a good one, Chris. What are your suggestions for dealing with an increase in mosquitoes due to No Mow May?
So I know mosquitoes really like those wet, puddly areas. So if you have pots that are sitting around, whatever, where there's that standing water, that's the kind of habitat that they're breeding in. So just having grass is not really the place where you're going to find all of the larvae that are causing that huge population.
Yeah, and I really hope that the viewers of this presentation don't feel that we're trying to sell them a panacea here. They're going to be insects that you don't like. They're going to bite you, and mosquitoes definitely pose a threat in terms of West Nile virus and other things, as do ticks. We're dealing with living systems, right? Wasps, and that fly that you showed. Having predators, insect predators in your landscape help to keep those prey species in check. But again, that's not going to keep you from getting bit. It's not going to keep you from getting West Nile virus. It's we live in a living system, and if you're, and I don't mean to be adversarial about this, but if you're unwilling to tolerate that, then this is definitely not for you. And if you're unwilling to expose your neighbors to those kinds of risks, if you have that kind of sensitivity in your neighborhood, then yeah, this is not going to go well for you. So conversations are absolutely required here. And the same thing is true for beekeeping. It's one of the first things you do if you want to learn to raise honeybees. Talk to your neighbors about whether or not they're okay with that. Maybe people who have loud dogs should do the very same thing, or who are about to take on dogs, right?
Thank you for that honest answer again. So mosquitoes. A good comment. This would be great if PERT could sell No Mow May signs for use. Good comment. Then another question about working with your lawn service. Ms. Robin suggested that marking off an area that you don't want mown could be a good way to do that. I agree with that. Definitely. I mean, you paid them, they won't mow what you tell them not to mow. Does that make sense? Just marking off that area. Great question from Tom. No Mow May implies it's okay to mow before and after that month. Is that really what you're advocating?
Absolutely not. I think No Mow May has a great ring to it. And like I said, it fits on your phone real well. And we are going to suggest in March that you can mow before May, you can mow during May, you can mow after May. And all of this is, we hope to lay out the parameters for you to make your choice on your landscape.
There were also within the UK, they were like, oh, you could do Let It Bloom June and Knee High July. So
Right.
I don't think they had one for April.
Just finishing up with comments here. Jen Sirwoods asked us to share this information with EACs, Birdtown, Pennsylvania. Good suggestion, Jen. I think we started that process earlier today, so they received the invitation. So the recording will be available for them as well. Good suggestion. Oh, Trish got back to me. She said, Twin Streams Park is our park with an 8-acre meadow and shelf on. That's really awesome that they're doing things like that. They're adding natives, but have a continual battle with invasives. We understand that very well, but it's a fight worth fighting.
And 8 acres is just barely enough to have a self-sustaining community. The size and shape really matter when you deal with plant communities that can self-seed and regenerate clonally and also outcompete weeds. And every plant community has its own weeds.
If anyone has any more pressing questions, please toss them in the chat. I'm going to read this last comment, and then we'll wrap up here. Maureen says she's like to echo Jennifer. She's on her township's EAC. Good job, Maureen. And she would love to be able to share this information with their residents. Is that possible? Maureen, I know for a fact you can share this, at least this webinar, once it's available tomorrow. I'll be emailing that out to everybody that registered at least. They'll have access to it from an email, but it'll be on our YouTube page probably sometime tomorrow. So if that's the information you want to share, yes, absolutely share that with everybody and anybody. If there's something more specific you'd like, just please reach out to me and we can see if we can get you that information. Anyone on this call tonight does have my email. My name's Kevin Roth, so kroth@Pennypack Trust. If you have any questions, you can shoot those to me and I'll get them to Chris or Sarah. So this was a great presentation, very honest and exciting. It's great to have this many people join us tonight for this presentation. We're happy to share it and we're going to continue this work into next year. So thank you all for joining us. We have another great research presentation coming up. I believe it's February, one sec, let me get the right date for you. Yes, Thursday, February 24th, and we will be presenting on documenting and managing Pennypack Trust native plant communities. So one of our horticulturalists have gone through the preserve, looking at past plant lists and comparing them to today, and he's found some interesting things that he's going to present with you guys. I put the link for all of our coming events in the chat box here. So if you're interested in helping out at Free a Tree this Saturday, or if you'd like to come help move Christmas trees to the creek to act as sediment traps, we're having an event on President's Day, which is a Monday. We'd love to have you guys out for that. And then a handful of other great events that you guys can register for, whether you want to learn or get your hands dirty or just to enjoy the preserve. All of those events are there. We have a great lineup of spring events as well coming up. So thank you guys for joining us and the Pennypack Trust tonight. We were happy to have you. And like I said, the recording will be available tomorrow. I don't see any more questions in the chat unless Chris or Sarah have anything to finish off with.
I just wanted to say that a comment had reminded me of this. If you guys do anything with your lawn, especially this year, that is, this inspired you, we'd love for you to share it with us if you want to. I'm sure there's some contact information of where you can share that. But yeah, we'd love to see what your ideas are and how you're interpreting it and what you're doing.
Yes. Well, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Chris. And we're happy to present this and keep working on this. Hopefully we'll see you guys in March. That presentation is not on our website yet, but it will be mid-February. So check out the website for the registration for that. And thank you, members. If you're not a member, please consider becoming a member, and we'll see you all at our coming events. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you all.